10 years ago, she believed love could survive anything. Then he disappeared. No goodbye, no note, no call. Only silence. Lena Whitmore buried her broken heart in work, rebuilding her life from the pieces, and she thought she had forgotten. Until that morning, when the conference room door opened and the man she swore she would never think of again walked in, colder, more dangerous, and his eyes stared straight at her as if 10 years had never existed. Like and comment the city you're viewing from, so I know how far this story has come. Don't go anywhere, because this is just the beginning. The morning it all collapsed started like every other morning. Lena Whitmore had spent pretending she was fine. 6:15. The alarm didn't wake her because she hadn't slept. She'd been lying on her back in the dark of her studio apartment on West 47th, staring at the water stain on the ceiling that looked vaguely like a fist, listening to the city drag itself awake outside the window. Garbage trucks. A drunk shouting at no one. The distant moan of a subway car beneath the street. Ordinary sounds. The sounds of a life that asked nothing of her and gave back exactly that. She'd learned to be grateful for ordinary. Ordinary didn't break your heart. She was in the shower by 6:20, standing under water so hot it turned her shoulders pink, and she was already running through the day in her head the way she always did. Produce delivery at 8, linen service at 9. The afternoon reservation list needed to be cross-checked against the private dining requests, and there was that issue with the sommelier who'd been short-pouring the reserve bottles, which she'd have to address without getting HR involved because the man had 4 kids, and she wasn't a monster even when she had every right to be. General manager of Noir House. That was who Lena Whitmore was now. That was the whole of it. She was good at the job. She was good at it in the way people get good at things when the job is the only structure holding them upright. Noir House sat on the corner of Park and 52nd, 32 tables, a private dining room that seated 20, a wine cellar that had been written up in 5 separate publications in the past 18 months. The kind of place where the tablecloths cost more than most people's rent, and the lighting was calibrated to make everyone look like they had secrets worth keeping, which most of them did. Lena had learned early that fine dining was just theater with better cutlery. The rich came to perform for each other, and she stage managed the whole production from behind a smile that gave nothing away. She was good at that too, the smile that gave nothing away. She got to the restaurant by 7:40, 20 minutes before her usual time, because Marcus, her assistant manager, had texted her the night before. All staff at 9. Ownership wants to be there, new owner. That was the whole message. Marcus typed the way he talked. Clipped, no decoration, take it or leave it. She'd written back, got it. And then she'd lain awake until 6:15 thinking about what that meant. Noir House had changed hands twice in the 7 years she'd worked there. The first time, nothing changed except the letterhead on her paychecks. The second time, they'd lost 3 staff members, and her benefits package had been renegotiated downward in ways she still felt in her back teeth every time she thought about her health insurance premium. New ownership meant uncertainty, and uncertainty was the one thing Lena had spent a decade learning to live without. She walked the floor before anyone else arrived, the way she always did, running her fingers along the tops of chair backs, checking that the place settings were aligned. It was a ritual that had nothing to do with the chairs or the silverware, and everything to do with the feeling of being in control of at least this small square of the world. She needed the restaurant to be perfect before the day started, because the day was rarely perfect once it got going. By 8:50, the full staff had assembled in the private dining room. 15 people arranged around the long mahogany table and spilling along the walls, cooks still smelling of the supply run, servers in their civvies since the early shift wasn't due to start for hours. The mood was the specific kind of nervous that happens when nobody knows whether they're about to be reassured or gutted. Lena stood at the far end of the table and kept her face arranged into the expression she'd practiced in the bathroom mirror for years. Professional, present, unreachable. Marcus leaned in close. Lawyer from the acquisition team is outside. Says the new owner is running about 5 minutes late. Then we wait. You know anything about who bought it? Not yet. Rumor from the kitchen is it's some kind of holding company, international. Kitchens run on rumors, Lena said. That's how they stay warm. Marcus looked at her sideways. He was 28 and smart enough to know when she was deflecting, but he'd worked with her long enough to know not to push it. The lawyer came in first, young, female, carrying a briefcase with the rigid posture of someone performing competence. She introduced herself as Ms. Farrell, said the new ownership group was committed to Noir House's continued excellence, said all current staff contracts would be honored through the transition period, said there would be a full operational review in the coming weeks. Standard acquisition language. Lena had heard it before. She watched the faces of her staff and cataloged the relief on some of them and the skepticism on others and filed both observations away. Then Ms. Farrell said, "The new owner would like to say a few words personally." The door opened. The man who walked in was wearing a charcoal suit that had been cut for his body specifically, not bought off any rack. His hair was darker than she remembered, threaded through with something that might have been gray at the temples in certain light. He moved the way men move when they've spent years in rooms where the wrong step costs something real, measured, deliberate, the stillness of someone who has learned to never look hurried regardless of what is happening inside. His jaw was harder, his eyes were darker. The boy she had known at 24 was not visible in this man except in the architecture of the face, which was the same, and which she recognized with a jolt that felt like stepping off a curb she hadn't seen. Adrian DeLuca. He was looking at her before he finished walking through the door, not scanning the room, not addressing the group, looking at her specifically like the 15 other people in the room were furniture, and she was the only thing in the space that mattered to him. Lena's hands went cold. She didn't move. She was good at not moving. She stood at the end of the mahogany table with her spine straight and her face absolutely controlled, and she felt the floor rearrange itself under her feet in some way she couldn't articulate, some fundamental shifting of the geometry of the room, and she breathed through it. One breath, slow, even. Adrian DeLuca stopped at the head of the table. He looked at the staff with the expression of a man who was comfortable being looked at and said something brief about vision and excellence and the commitment of the new ownership group. And his voice was the same voice she remembered, and also not the same at all. Lower, more carefully composed, each word placed like something that would cost him if he dropped it. And the entire time he spoke, Lena watched the wall behind his head and felt her heartbeat in her wrists. When the meeting ended, people filed out. There was the low murmur of relief and the specific exhale of people who had been holding their breath. Lena moved toward the door with everyone else. Ms. Whitmore. His voice. Just her name. Just her professional name, which he had never once used, which he had no reason to know except that he'd clearly made it his business to know it. She stopped. She turned. The room was almost empty. Miss Farrell was gathering papers. Marcus was already in the hallway. Adrian was looking at her. "A moment," he said. Not a question. "I have deliveries coming in," she said. "Marcus can handle them." "Marcus handles what I ask him to handle." A pause. The lawyer excused herself quietly and pulled the door almost closed behind her, leaving it open a crack, which felt deliberate in a way Lena didn't like. "Lena," Adrian said. "Don't." The word came out flat and controlled, and she was proud of that. She was proud of the flatness of it. "Don't do that. We're in a professional setting. If you have operational questions for the management staff, you can direct them through Ms. Farrell or schedule something through the proper channels. I run this restaurant, Mr. DeLuca, and I intend to keep running it well, so if that's all, I'm not here to fire you." "I didn't think you were." "I'm not here to restructure." "Then why are you here?" She said it before she could stop herself, and the crack in the control was small, but she felt it, and from the look on his face he felt it too. He looked at her for 3 full seconds without speaking. There was something in his face that she refused to name. She'd had 10 years of practice refusing to name it. "To talk," he said finally. "We have nothing to talk about." "Lena, I have a restaurant to run." She pulled the door fully open. The noise of the kitchen, the clatter of ordinary working life flooded in. "Welcome to Noir House, Mr. DeLuca. I hope the acquisition meets your expectations." She walked out. Her hands were still cold. She kept them at her sides, fingers loose, and she walked to her office and closed the door and stood with her back against it in the quiet for exactly 45 seconds before she trusted herself to move again. She'd built this life out of the rubble of the one he'd destroyed. She was not going to let him walk back into it wearing a suit that cost more than her monthly salary and a look on his face like he had any right to explanations. The produce delivery came in at 8:04. The linen service was 11 minutes late. The sommelier, when she finally cornered him in the wine cellar at 11:30, turned red and admitted the short pouring, and she handled it without involving HR, and he looked at her like she'd shown him mercy, which she had, because she was capable of it even when she didn't feel like being. The lunch service ran clean. A four-top complained about the temperature of their entrees, and she comped their desserts, and they left satisfied and tipped 22%, which was better than most. The restaurant ran. That was what restaurants did and what she made them do. She was good at it. Adrian did not appear on the floor during service. She didn't look for him, and she didn't ask, and she told herself the fact that she was aware of his absence meant nothing. It was during the gap between lunch and dinner prep, when the kitchen went quiet and the waitstaff sat family meal and Lena usually caught up on paperwork, that Marcus knocked on her office door and came in carrying a look she didn't like. "You should probably know," he said, sitting down across from her without being asked, which he never did, which meant whatever he had to say was serious enough that he'd decided comfort was less important than speed, that the ownership group sent over a full benefits package revision today, effective immediately. Lena looked up from her laptop. "How bad?" "That's the thing." Marcus set a printed sheet on the desk. "It's not bad, They added medical, full coverage, no deductible. Dental, vision, all staff. The prep guys, the dishwashers, everyone." She stared at the paper. "They also backpaid 3 months of what the previous package should have covered," Marcus said. "Effective retroactively, like they knew exactly what was cut." Lena said nothing. She picked up the paper and read it twice and set it back down. "That's unusual," she said. "Little bit, yeah." "Who authorized it?" "The acquisition team, but it came with a note that the directive was from ownership directly." She looked at the paper again, then at the wall, then back at the paper. "Anything else?" Facilities sent over the renovation approval list, the capital improvements that were approved in the first week of the new ownership. Marcus set another sheet down, this one longer. New prep stations in the kitchen, updated point-of-sale system, resurfaced the private dining room floor. Oh, and they approved the exhaust vent replacement on the 3rd floor that you'd been requesting since last February. The exhaust vent. She'd put in 4 separate maintenance requests about the 3rd floor exhaust vent. The previous ownership had denied all 4 on cost grounds. "Anything else?" she said again, and her voice was careful the way her voice got when she was working very hard to sound like she didn't care about the answer. "They also quietly cleared the debt on Jamie Reyes's garnishment," Marcus said, watching her. "The wage garnishment that was coming out of his check. Legal fees from his divorce. Someone paid it off. He doesn't know who." A pause. "Jamie's been here 6 years. He's your best prep cook." Lena set down her pen. Outside, through the small office window, she could see the alley behind the restaurant. The dumpsters, the service door, the ordinary, unglamorous back end of a place that looked like magic from the front. She looked at it for a long moment. "These feel like coincidences," she said. "They feel like a lot of things," Marcus said carefully. "Go make sure the 4:30 reservations are confirmed." He stood up. He stopped at the door. "Lena, you know this guy, the new owner?" She kept her eyes on the alley. "Why would you ask that?" "Because he asked about you specifically, before the meeting. Asked Farrell who the GM was. She told me." The silence stretched long enough that Marcus understood it was his cue to leave. He left. Lena sat alone with the benefit sheet and the renovation list and Jamie Reyes's cleared debt and the particular weight of a man's name she hadn't let herself speak in 10 years. And she thought about the exhaust vent, the one she'd requested 4 times and been denied 4 times. And she thought about the fact that someone would have to have read every single one of those requests to know about it. And her hands went cold again the way they had in the morning. It was just past 3 o'clock when she went looking for the acquisition files. She had clearance. She was the GM. The transition documents were accessible through the shared drive the legal team had set up during the acquisition process, and she had every professional reason to want to understand the ownership structure of the place she managed. She sat at her desk and opened folder after folder with the composed efficiency of someone doing routine due diligence, and she told herself she wasn't looking for anything specific. It took her 40 minutes to find the internal investment memo. It was buried 3 levels deep in a subfolder labeled Pre-Acquisition Assessment, NYC Portfolio. 14 pages of financial analysis, market projections, and return on investment calculations. She skimmed it with the focused speed of someone who'd read enough business documents to understand their grammar, and what she understood was this: Noir House, by any reasonable financial metric, had no business being on an acquisition list for a portfolio like DeLuca Capital's. The margins were too thin. The real estate was leased, not owned. The brand recognition, while strong in its niche, didn't scale. 3 pages of the assessment were dedicated to making this exact argument in precise professional language. By any rational accounting, Noir House was not a DeLuca Capital acquisition. The conclusion of the memo didn't bother with euphemism. Recommendation: acquisition is not consistent with portfolio strategy. Flagged for review. Beneath that, in a different font, added later, she realized, added after the fact, a single handwritten note that had been scanned into the document. Acquire. A D. 2 words. No explanation, no financial justification, just the initials and the order. She scrolled back to the beginning of the document, looked at the date of the initial assessment, looked at the date the final acquisition was authorized. 3 days. It had taken 3 days from the first investigator's report. She found that too, a separate attachment, a private investigation firm's file note, to the acquisition order. The private investigation firm's file note was brief. It contained an address, a description of the subject's daily routine, and a physical description. The subject was her. Female, mid-30s, brown hair, observed on premises of Noir House, 52nd and Park, employed as general manager. Positive identification confirmed via... She stopped reading. She sat with the file open on her screen in the quiet of her office while the restaurant hummed back to life around her for the dinner service, and the sounds of the kitchen warming up came through the walls, the familiar percussion of her ordinary life. And she thought about 10 years of silence and a note that said acquire and a private investigator who had been instructed to look for her specifically, and she understood suddenly and completely that Noir House had never been a real estate play. It had never been about the restaurant at all. Her phone buzzed on the desk. She looked at it without picking it up. A text from an unknown number, 4 words. We need to talk. She knew the number was his before she looked it up. She knew it the way you know certain things. Not logically, not from evidence, but from somewhere under the ribs where logic doesn't reach. She set the phone face down on the desk. Through the office wall, she could hear the first guests of the evening arriving, the low murmur of the host greeting them at the door, the clink of glassware being lifted from the bar. Her restaurant. Her evening. Her controlled and manageable life. She flipped the phone back over and looked at the text again. And then the second message came in, not from the same number, from a number she didn't recognize at all. And this one said something that made the cold in her hand spread all the way to her chest. Tell DeLuca that what belongs to him is now under our protection. He'll understand. Make sure she reads this. She stared at the screen. The door to the alley rattled. Not the wind. The handle. Someone trying it from the outside. Lena was across the office and had the back door to the alley in her line of sight through the small security monitor on her desk before she'd consciously decided to move. The monitor was a 4-inch screen, black and white, grainy the way cheap cameras always are, but the resolution was good enough to show her the alley was empty. The dumpsters, the service door, the loading dock at the far end. Nothing moved. The handle had stopped rattling. She stood with one hand on the desk and her breathing controlled and her eyes on the monitor, and she counted to 30. Nothing. She picked up her phone, looked at the second text again. Tell DeLuca that what belongs to him is now under our protection. He'll understand. Make sure she reads this. Make sure she reads this. Whoever had sent that message knew she had a phone, knew the number, knew she was in this building right now. She thought about the alley door. She thought about how long she'd been sitting in this office going through acquisition files, and whether anyone watching would have been able to see the light under the door, and she told herself she was being paranoid, and then immediately decided she wasn't being paranoid enough. She called Marcus. He picked up on the second ring, background noise of the kitchen behind him. Yeah. Is the alley door locked? A beat. Should be. Why? Go check it. Lena. Now Marcus. She heard him moving, a pause. It's locked. Deadbolts thrown. Who has keys besides you and me? Facilities. And whoever the new ownership team brought in this morning for the walkthrough. He paused again. What's going on? Nothing. Thank you. She hung up. She stood for another moment. Then she picked up her phone, went to the text from the unknown number, the second one, the threat that wasn't quite a threat, and she forwarded it to the first number, to Adrian's number. She typed one word below the forwarded message. Explain. She put the phone in her pocket and went to run her dinner service because the restaurant didn't stop, because her life was disintegrating, and because the work was the one thing that had never failed her. He replied 11 minutes later. She felt the buzz against her hip during the middle of a conversation with the head server about a VIP reservation in the back corner booth, and she finished the conversation completely before she stepped into the service corridor and read the message. Where are you right now? Not a question. The period at the end where a question mark should have been. She typed back, my office. Why? His reply came in under 30 seconds. Stay there. Don't go back to the floor. I'm sending someone to you. Her jaw tightened. She typed, you don't give me orders in my own restaurant. His reply, Lena, please. That word, that one word. She stood in the service corridor with the sounds of the dinner service running behind her and the phone in her hand and the word, please, from a man who had vanished from her life without a single explanation for 10 years. And something shifted in her chest in a way she didn't want to examine. She went back to her office. She stood. She didn't sit, because sitting felt like compliance. He came himself. She hadn't expected that. She'd expected one of the men in dark suits she'd seen flanking him that morning, the silent geometry of a security detail doing its job. Instead, it was Adrian who knocked on her office door 8 minutes after his last message, who opened it when she didn't answer, and who stepped inside and closed it behind him, and in the small cramped space of her office that smelled like printer paper and cold coffee, he looked bigger than he had in the boardroom. The suit jacket was gone. His sleeves were rolled to the forearm. He looked at her, then at the security monitor on her desk, then at her phone, and his jaw did something complicated. You forwarded it to me right away, he said. You didn't call the police first. I don't know what it means yet. It means they know where you are. He crossed to the monitor and looked at it. The alley was still empty. It means they've been watching. Who are they? He didn't answer immediately. He turned from the monitor and looked at her the way people look at problems they've been dreading, with a kind of exhausted recognition. Adrian, her voice came out flat and hard. Who sent that message? People who want to use you to get to me. Why would they use me? She held his eyes when she said it. I'm nobody to you. 10 years of nobody. You're going to have to give me something better than that. Something moved across his face. This isn't the moment for, then find me a better moment, because right now I have a restaurant full of people and a text message on my phone from someone who seems to know my number and my location and who referenced me as something that belongs to you, which I most certainly do not, and I would like an explanation that makes some kind of sense. He looked at her. The exhausted recognition had shifted into something harder. He pulled out his own phone, typed something, put it back. I'm pulling my security team to the building, he said. Front entrance, side door, the alley. You're not putting armed men around my restaurant. I already have 2 on the floor. They've been there since this morning. The silence that followed was the kind that happens when someone says something so far outside the boundaries of what you thought you understood that your brain has to recalibrate before it can produce language. Since this morning, Lena said. Yes. Since this morning when you walked in here and introduced yourself as the new owner. Yes. You put security on my restaurant on the same day you revealed you'd bought it. I put security on you the same day I found you, Adrian said, which is not the same thing. She sat down, not because she'd decided to, but because her legs made the decision independently. She sat in her office chair and looked at the man standing in front of the security monitor in her office, and she thought about the private investigation file and the word acquire in handwritten ink and the benefits package and Jamie Reyes's clear debt and the exhaust vent that had been on the maintenance list since February, and she said, "How long have you been looking?" His answer was immediate. No hesitation, like he'd been waiting 10 years to say it. "Since the week after I left." The room was very quiet. "You left," she said. The word felt like pressing a bruise. "I know how that sounds." "Do you?" "Lena, you left," she said again, and this time the control in her voice slipped 1 degree, just one, just enough that she heard it and he heard it. "You were there, and then you were gone. No call, no letter, nothing. I waited 4 months before I stopped going to the apartment. I waited another year before I—" She stopped. She pressed her fingers flat against the desk. "You don't get to say you've been looking for me. You left. My father ordered your death." The words landed in the room like something physical. Lena looked at him. "His people had been watching us for 3 months," Adrian said. His voice was level in the way that voices get when the person speaking has rehearsed the level quality of it, has trained themselves not to crack. "He decided you were a vulnerability, a liability. The word he used was distraction. He gave the order on a Tuesday. I found out on a Wednesday. You were still alive on Thursday because I moved faster than his people did, and I made him believe that I agreed with him. I made him believe I was ending it myself. And the only way to make that convincing was to actually end it, walk away, completely. No contact, no trace, nothing he could interpret as a loose end." He stopped. "If you'd received a letter, he would have read it first. If I'd called, the call would have been monitored. Any contact was a reason for him to doubt me, and if he doubted me, he'd finish the job himself." Lena said nothing. "I had 2 hours to become someone who didn't love you," Adrian said. "So I did. I became that person completely, in every visible way, because your life depended on how convincing I was. The air in the office felt wrong, pressurized, like before a storm. Your father," she said finally, "is dead. 3 years ago." A pause. "It didn't make it safe to find you immediately. There were others who'd have used you to get to me just the same. But I looked. The whole time I looked." She wanted to say something clean and definitive. She wanted the words that would put him on the other side of a line she could hold. But she was sitting in an office in a restaurant he'd bought. Had bought for no financial reason, no rational business purpose, only because someone had spotted her here. And the text message was still on her phone and the alley door had rattled. And the story he was telling her had the terrible texture of something true. "I need to run my service," she said. "Lena, I need to run my service." She stood up. "Your people can stay outside. I want them invisible. I don't want my staff frightened. I don't want anyone asking questions. If you want to talk more, it happens after service. Not before, not during." He looked at her for a long moment and then nodded, one short movement. He picked up the jacket he'd left draped over the chair by the door. "There are 3 of them," he said, stopping with his hand on the doorframe. "The families who sent that text. Conti, Marrero, and a third group that goes by a name I don't say in public buildings. They've been consolidating for 8 months. What they want isn't money. What they want is leverage over me, and the quickest path to that has always been—" "Get out of my office," Lena said. "Not angry, just clear, definitive. Please." He left. She stood behind her desk for 60 seconds. Then she tucked her phone in her pocket, checked that her face was correct in the small mirror by the door, and went to run the rest of her service. It was the hardest service she'd run in 7 years. Not because anything went wrong. The kitchen performed cleanly. The floor staff were sharp. A 12-top corporate table in the private room kept the revenue numbers healthy. It was hard because she was running it with a man's confession detonating in slow motion somewhere behind her sternum, and the knowledge that there were people in the building she couldn't see who were there because someone outside had decided she was useful as a weapon. She kept her face correct the whole time. She was good at it. It was Marcus who found her during the 9 o'clock lull, the brief quiet between the last entrees going out and the dessert rush beginning. He materialized at her elbow the way he did when he had something she wasn't going to like. "The tall guy by the bar," he said, speaking low and close. "Expensive jacket, nursing the same scotch for an hour, and the woman near the side entrance reading the same page of her book for 40 minutes. I know. They're not guests. I know, Marcus. They work for the new owner. Yes. He was quiet for 3 steps. Then, Lena, what the hell is going on? I'll explain when I can. She glanced at him. He was looking at her with the expression of someone who had worked alongside her long enough to know the difference between professional composure and a woman holding herself together with the structural integrity of a building that's already taken the hit and hasn't fallen yet. Trust me until I can. You know I will, he said, but I want it on the record that I don't like it. Noted. She made it through the rest of service. 9:40, last table gone, kitchen breaking down. She stood at the pass and watched her team move with the efficient choreography of people who knew their work, and she thought about 10 years. She thought about the apartment she'd left behind, the forwarding address she'd deliberately never filed, the 3 different cities she'd moved through in the first 2 years. Not running, she told herself, just moving, just building. She thought about the morning she'd stopped checking the door when she heard a knock, the morning she'd understood he wasn't coming back, and how she'd decided that the thing to do was to stop expecting him and build something that didn't require him. And she had. She had built something solid and professional and genuinely good, and it had been enough. It had been almost enough. She found Adrian in the empty bar after the last staff member had clocked out. He was sitting on a bar stool with a glass of water, not scotch, not anything, and he was looking at his phone, and when she came through the door, he put the phone away immediately, like he'd been waiting and didn't want her to know how long. She sat down 2 stools away from him. She didn't look at him. She looked at the bottles behind the bar, the organized geometry of them, the way the light caught the glass. Ask me something true, she said. He didn't hesitate. Are you all right? No. A pause. Were you ever going to tell me? If the situation had been different, if none of this had happened, if you'd found me some other way and nobody knew, and there was no threat, would you have told me the truth? He was quiet long enough that the silence became its own answer, which was not the answer she wanted. I don't know, he said finally. I told myself I would. I told myself that was the point. Find her, explain, give her the choice. But I found you 3 days ago, and the first thing I did was arrange protection instead of knocking on your door. So. He stopped. I don't know. She nodded slowly. That was the most honest thing he'd said, and she knew it was the most honest thing, and she hated that it made him more credible, not less. What do they want? She said. Specifically, not leverage in the abstract. What's the end goal? There's a vote happening in 6 weeks. The 5 major families east of the Mississippi are being asked to ratify a new structure that would consolidate control under one financial authority. If I vote against it, which I intend to, and if I can bring 2 other voting members with me, the consolidation fails. They've been working on those 2 members for months. Bribes, threats, the usual menu. He turned the water glass in his hands. I'm the harder problem. So they went looking for a softer angle. Me. You. She finally looked at him. And what exactly do they plan to do with me? Take you. Use you as leverage to force my vote. The word take sat in the bar's quiet like something dropped on marble. How long do I have before they try? She said. My analyst thinks 48 hours. Maybe less. He met her eyes. I want to move you tonight. There's a property I own outside the city. It's secure, it's staffed. You'd be... I'm not leaving my restaurant. Lena, I'm not leaving. These are my people, my staff. If I disappear, they don't know why. They panic. If you stay, they use you as a weapon against me, and in the process, they don't particularly care what condition they return you in. His voice didn't rise, but the weight behind it did. I have been very careful for 10 years to make sure nothing and no one in my life could be used this way. That care kept you safe. It cost... He stopped. Cost things I'm not going to list for you right now. But I need you to understand that these people are not running a bluff. I understand that. Then, I said I understand it. I didn't say I was leaving. He looked at her. She looked back. Neither of them moved. Then his phone went off. Not a text, a call, and he took it out and looked at the screen, and his face did something she hadn't seen on it before. Not alarm exactly, but the thing that exists under alarm in people who've trained themselves not to show it. The muscle in his jaw. He picked up. said nothing. Listened for approximately 4 seconds. Then he was off the bar stool with the phone still at his ear, moving toward the window that faced the street, and Lena was already standing because the quality of his movement had communicated something that bypassed conscious thought and went straight to the part of the brain that has been keeping humans alive since before they had language. "Stay away from the windows," he said, and his voice was completely controlled and completely different from any voice she'd heard from him tonight, stripped of everything that wasn't information. He spoke into the phone. "How many? Where exactly? Do not engage until I'm in position." Lena did not stay away from the windows. She moved to the edge of one and looked through the gap in the curtain, and what she saw in the street below was 3 black SUVs parked at staggered intervals that were not the parking of people who'd stopped to find a space. Their engines were off. No one had gotten out. "Adrian?" Her voice came out even. She was surprised by that. He was beside her in 4 steps, looked through the gap, and in the same motion pulled her backward away from the glass with one hand. Firm, not rough, but with the absolute certainty of someone who has made the calculation about acceptable force. "We're going now, bub," he said. "My staff, all gone." I verified. He already had her by the elbow, moving toward the back of the restaurant, toward the kitchen, toward the service exit that opened onto the alley she'd been watching on a monitor 2 hours ago. "There's a car in the alley. My people are holding the perimeter for the next 4 minutes. You planned for this." "I planned for this possibility." They went through the kitchen, through the stainless steel and residual heat of the ovens, through the back door into the alley where the night air hit her face cold and sharp and real. A black car, not an SUV, something lower and less conspicuous, idled at the alley's far end with its lights off. A man she didn't know was standing by the rear door and opened it when he saw them. She got in. Adrian got in behind her. The door closed. The car moved. "Where are we going?" she said. "Somewhere safe." That's not an answer. "North." He had his phone out again, typing. "The estate I mentioned. We'll take secondary roads. It's 2 hours." Through the rear window, she saw the lights of the street they'd been parked on, the restaurant's facade with its unlit sign, the ordinary corner that had contained her life for 7 years. Getting smaller. "My keys are inside," she said. An absurd thing to say. She said it anyway. "I'll have someone retrieve them." She turned back around. The city moved past the windows. She felt the shape of the night rearranging itself around her, the old architecture of her life giving way to something she hadn't chosen and couldn't yet see the dimensions of. And she gripped the door handle not to open it, but because her hands needed something solid. They were 2 blocks from the restaurant when the car in front of them braked hard. The driver said one word. Sharp, terse. Not a word she could hear clearly over the sound of her own heartbeat. Adrian reached across her without explanation and pushed her head down below the window line, and in the same instant the night outside the car went white with headlights, a vehicle coming fast from a side street. And she heard the sound. She'd never heard it outside of a screen, but she understood it immediately, the way understanding sometimes arrives fully formed, of something striking the rear panel of the car, and then Adrian's body was covering hers, and he was saying her name in a voice stripped down to its most essential frequency. And the car was accelerating, and she couldn't see anything except the dark fabric of his jacket and the city screaming past them outside. The car hit 60 in a space that shouldn't have allowed it. Lena felt the acceleration in her sternum, that pressing down weight of sudden speed, and Adrian's arm across her back was the only fixed point in a world that had gone liquid. She couldn't see anything. Her face was angled down toward the seat leather, and she could smell his jacket. Wool. Something faint underneath it. Soap or sweat. Something human. And outside the windows, the city was a smear of light and noise, and the sound she'd heard, the sound against the rear panel, was replaying in her skull on a loop that her brain couldn't seem to interrupt. "Stay down!" His voice, directly above her. Not loud, not panicked. The voice of someone operating on a frequency she didn't have access to. "I'm down," she said. Her own voice surprised her. Flat, functional. Like the part of her that managed crises had taken over from the part of her that was terrified and filed the terror somewhere to be dealt with later, or never. The car swerved, hard right. She braced against his arm in the door and felt the tires find a different surface, rougher, the sound changing under them. the rhythm of the road becoming something that wasn't the smooth asphalt of a midtown street. The driver said something in a low voice, not to them, into an earpiece. She caught fragments. Second vehicle. Confirmed 2, possibly 3. Taking 11th to bypass. Then the acceleration again, and a sound behind them. Not another impact, something different. The sound of another vehicle making the same turn at the same speed. And Adrian shifted his weight, and she felt him look back. "How far?" he said. To the driver. 8 minutes to the bridge. "Make it 5. She felt him move, and then he was sitting up, and she pushed herself upright because she wasn't going to stay folded in half while her life was being decided around her. She looked through the rear window. The following vehicle was close. One set of headlights, high and bright, the kind of lights that belong on something heavy. "They're not shooting," she said. "No." "Why not?" "Because they want you intact." He said it without inflection, information, not comfort. If they'd wanted a different outcome, the first shot wouldn't have been at the rear panel. A warning. The first shot had been a warning to the car to stop. She processed that and filed it. "Where's your security team, the ones on the perimeter?" "Engaging the vehicles that came from the front." A pause. "There were 3 approaches. We took the one they left open. They left it open on purpose. To funnel us north." He was looking at his phone. "Which is what we're doing." She stared at him. "They're hurting us." He didn't answer, which was its own answer. She looked forward through the windshield. The driver was good. She could see that in the way he moved through the gaps in traffic. Not reckless, but absolutely precise. The kind of driving that comes from very specific training. They were on 11th now, heading north. The Hudson, a black absence to their left between the gaps in the buildings. The following vehicle had dropped back slightly. She watched it in the mirror. "They're not trying to close the distance," she said. "No. They want us at the estate." "That's what I think." "Then we don't go to the estate." He looked at her. In the dark of the car, his face was all angles, the city light moving across it in pieces. Something shifted in his expression. Not surprise exactly, but the particular look of a man who has spent years operating surrounded by people who wait for him to make decisions, encountering someone who doesn't. "Where do you suggest?" he said. She thought for approximately 3 seconds. "The Renfield Building, corner of 59th and 9th. It's a commercial property, restaurant supply company. I manage their private events. I have a key code for the freight entrance. Open floor, no windows below the 3rd story, multiple exit points." He looked at her for 1 more second. Then he leaned forward and told the driver. The driver adjusted without comment. The car took a hard left. Behind them, the following vehicle paused at the intersection. Then it came after them, but slower now, like something recalculating. They made the Renfield Building in 4 minutes. The driver pulled into the freight bay with the lights off, navigating by the ambient glow from the street, and stopped inside the vehicle bay with the security gate closing on a remote that the driver produced from somewhere. Darkness. The gate's mechanical noise as it finished closing. Then quiet, relative quiet, the muffled sound of the city outside and their own breathing. "They saw where we turned," the driver said. "Yes," Adrian said. "Stay with the car. Engine on." He was already opening his door. Lena was out before him. The freight bay smelled like metal and old concrete. She found the keypad by memory, 3rd pillar from the entrance, chest height, and punched in the 6-digit code and heard the door disengage. She pushed through into the building's interior stairwell, and Adrian was right behind her, and the door sealed behind them with a sound like a pressure lock completing. Dark stairwell. Emergency lighting, dim green, the kind that makes everything look like the inside of something biological. She took the stairs up, 2nd floor, because the 2nd floor had the layout she needed. One large open space, the event setup room, with a direct sight line to both street-facing stairwells. She pushed through into the room and stopped in the center of it and turned around. Adrian was 2 steps behind her. He was scanning the room, exits, windows, the dark upper corners, with the systematic speed of someone who has walked into a lot of unfamiliar rooms and learned to read them fast. His phone was in his hand. He was typing with his thumb, not looking at the screen, still scanning. "Who knows about this building?" he said. My assistant manager, a few vendors. Not enough to have leaked it. No. She crossed her arms. Her jacket was back at the restaurant. She'd left without it. The room wasn't cold, but she felt cold, not from temperature. Who knew we were leaving tonight? My security team, 4 people. And the route? Generated in the car. Only the driver knew it. So the 3 approaches they had set up, she stopped, worked through it. They didn't know the route. They knew we'd run, and they knew what direction we'd run because we had limited options, and they'd already blocked the others. That's not a leak. That's just geometry. He looked at her. Yes. Okay? She breathed. Okay. So the immediate problem is they know the neighborhood we're in and they have people looking. What's your timeline? My other team will be at the building in 12 minutes. And the people following us? 2 vehicles, I think. Maybe 3. They'll run a grid. He finally stopped scanning and looked at her directly. You did well. In the car. Don't. I'm not being... I know what you're being. Don't. She looked away from him. Along the wall of the event room was a line of folding tables, stacked chairs, the mundane infrastructure of parties and corporate dinners, the ordinary furniture of her professional life standing there in the green emergency light, looking like the set of something. Tell me about the vote. The consolidation vote in 6 weeks. You said you needed to bring 2 other members with you. Who? He was quiet for a beat, processing the change in direction. Vasquez and Okafor, he said. Marcus Vasquez controls the Southeast. Vincent Okafor runs the financial infrastructure for the northern families. If I get their votes against consolidation, the structure fails. Where are they now? Vasquez is in Miami. Okafor is... He stopped. She looked at him. What? Okafor is in New York. Something in his voice had changed. He arrived 2 days ago. He told me he was here for a separate business matter. But I haven't been able to reach him in 14 hours. The green light, the stacked chairs, her own breathing, which she was keeping deliberately even. You think they already have him, she said. I think it's possible. Then the vote is already... Not necessarily. Without Vasquez, it still fails. They need a majority. They can't manufacture one. He was typing again. I need to verify Okafor's status. Do it. He stepped away from her, phone to his ear. She turned and walked to the far window. 3rd floor, he'd said. No windows below the 3rd, they were on the 2nd, so she stood to the side of the window frame and looked down at the angle of street she could see. Nothing yet. A delivery truck? A woman walking a dog. She listened to Adrian speak in low, terse sentences behind her, and she thought about the second message on her phone, the one that had said, make sure she reads this. And she thought about the alley door rattling, and she thought about the way the 3 vehicles had been positioned in the street. Not random, not opportunistic, but deliberate and geometrically sound. Professionals. People who'd had time to plan. Time. She turned back. Adrian had ended the call. His face in the green light had done something new, tightened around the eyes and jaw in a way that she recognized from years of watching people receive bad news at dinner tables, the physical geography of a person absorbing something they didn't want to be true. Tell me, she said. Okafor, he said. And then he stopped. Started again. Okafor was found an hour ago, in his hotel room. A pause that had weight in it. He's alive. He'll stay alive, but he's not... He won't be attending any votes. She said nothing. Let the silence do its work. They move faster than I calculated, Adrian said. The control in his voice was doing something she hadn't heard it do before, straining, slightly, at the edges. 14 hours ago, everything was still in motion. Now, Okafor is out. They have 2 vehicles running a grid around this building, and Vasquez... He pulled out his phone again, looked at something on the screen. His face went very still. Vasquez just sent a message to my financial advisor, encrypted. My team intercepted it. What does it say? He looked up at her. It says he's abstaining from the vote. She processed that. So without Okafor and with Vasquez abstaining, the consolidation passes. Which means... Which means 6 weeks from now, Every criminal operation east of the Mississippi answers to one authority, with consolidated financial infrastructure and the kind of political reach that doesn't get dismantled by federal investigations or... He stopped, looked at his phone, looked at her. My financial advisor, Carver. He's the one Vasquez contacted. The words came out spaced, deliberate. Not me. He contacted my financial advisor instead of me. The silence in the room changed texture. Lena felt something shift in her understanding of the night's geometry. She watched Adrian's face work through it in real time, watched the moment the implication became a conclusion, and she saw what it cost him. How long has Carver been with you? She said. 9 years. Does he have access to Okafor's hotel booking? A pause. Through my travel coordination system, yes. Does he know about the Renfield building? Another pause. Longer. I had him run event insurance for a function here last spring. He looked up. He has the address. She was already moving toward the stairwell door. We need to go, she said. Right now. This building is... The sound that came through the floor beneath them was not loud, but it was specific. The controlled mechanical sound of a security gate being overridden. Not forced, overridden. With a code. She stopped with her hand on the stairwell door. Behind her, she heard Adrian say one quiet word that she didn't repeat. Then his hand was on her arm. Not the firm grip from the car, something different, more urgent. And they were moving through the stairwell door together and up, not down. Because down was where the sound had come from, and up was the only remaining direction that hadn't been taken from them yet. 3rd floor. She hit the door and it opened, and the 3rd floor was different from the 2nd. Not an event space, offices, a long corridor of frosted glass doors, dark. She went left because left took them away from the street-facing side and toward the building's rear, toward the secondary freight exit she'd used twice before when an event ran late, and the main entrance was locked by the building's overnight timer. Adrian was on his phone. He'd stopped speaking aloud. He was texting, fast, the tap of his thumbs the only sound, besides their footsteps on the corridor floor. My team, he said low, redirecting to rear of building. 2 minutes. We might not have 2 minutes. I know. She found the rear stairwell. It smelled different from the front one. Older, used less. The air stale and industrial. They went down with their backs to the wall and their feet finding the edges of the stairs, where the creaking was less likely, a thing she'd learned from a building manager who'd shown her around on a late-night setup and explained the structural quirks. She held that memory like a tool and used it. Ground floor. The rear freight exit was a single metal door with a crash bar. She looked at Adrian. Once that opens, we're committed, she said. Whatever's on the other side. My team is on the other side. Or Carver's people are on the other side. He met her eyes. Yes, or that. 1 second, 2. She hit the crash bar. Cold air. The back alley, different from Noir House's alley. Wider, running between 2 commercial buildings, lit by a single working streetlight at the far end. 2 figures 20 feet away, dark jackets, and she felt Adrian's body tense beside her before she heard him exhale. Walsh, he said, to the nearer figure. Report. Clear on the south approach. North has 1 vehicle we haven't identified. Your instruction? Hold. Adrian moved them both toward the car that was idling at the alley's far end. Different vehicle from the one they'd arrived in. He opened the rear door for her and she got in, and he followed and the car was moving before the door finished closing. She sat back. Her heart was doing something it had been doing for the past 40 minutes that she'd been refusing to acknowledge. A rapid, shallow rhythm that had more to do with shock than fear. The cardiovascular response to a reality that was updating itself faster than she could track. Carver, she said. Your financial advisor. 9 years. Yes. He was feeding intelligence to all 3 families. That's what the pattern suggests. He knew about Okafor's hotel. He had access to the Renfield building's codes. He knew your security team's communication protocols well enough to know when your perimeter would be down. She watched the alley disappear behind them. How long? I don't know. Guess. A pause. Long enough to map every protective layer around you, which means He stopped. She heard him recalibrate. The investigation that found you. The report that said you were at Noir House. My team ran it through Carver's office for verification. The words arrived in the car's interior with the specific gravity of something that has been falling from a great height and has finally landed. She turned her head and looked at him. Carver confirmed your location to me, Adrian said. His voice had gone very quiet. Which means he also reported it to them. Which means they didn't find me by accident, Lena said. They knew where I was before you did. Or at the same time. She held his eyes. They let you buy the restaurant, Adrian. They let you find me. Because they needed me in one place. They needed me close to you and in a fixed location and accessible. She heard the shape of it as she said it. They didn't find me to threaten you. They found me so that you would find me and come to me, and they could use the whole situation as the mechanism, he said. As the mechanism. Yes. The city moved past the windows. She was breathing steadily. It was taking conscious effort. So everything from the moment you walked through the door of Noir House, she said, was already part of their plan. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The benefits package, she said, the renovation approvals, all of it. You doing those things made it look like we were reconnecting, which is exactly what they needed to establish in order to make me useful as leverage. Yes. And now Okafor is in a hospital. Vasquez has abstained. Carver is in the wind, presumably. She looked at her hands in her lap, the city lights moving across her knuckles. What do they want from you specifically? The exact ask. My vote in favor of consolidation and my financial infrastructure. I have 7 holding companies with access to banking relationships in 14 countries. Under the consolidated structure, those relationships become theirs. And if you refuse, the silence was its own answer again. She looked up. They'll use me. To make the point, yes, that refusing has a cost that I'll feel in a way that money can't compensate. She nodded slowly. The car was on a bridge now. She could feel it in the road surface and see the dark water below through the window. Somewhere she'd lost track of. Somewhere north. Here's what I need to know, she said. And I need the true answer, not the answer that protects me from something. How many people in your organization are Carver? What do you mean? I mean, how many people in your organization have been compromised? Is it just him, or is it deeper than that? He looked at her. The look lasted long enough to tell her what the answer was going to be before he said it. I don't know it, he said. After tonight, I genuinely don't know. She turned back to the window. The bridge ended. Dark road, trees at the margins, the city receding behind them. She felt the structure of her previous understanding of the situation, already damaged, already rebuilt once tonight, give way a second time, and beneath it there was not another layer of understanding but simply open ground, uncharted, with no blueprint for what came next. She had managed this restaurant for 7 years by understanding its systems better than anyone else in the building, by knowing where the pressure points were and what failed under load and what held. She had built her entire professional competence on the premise that any system could be understood if you watched it long enough, and that an understood system could be controlled. She didn't have that anymore. The car moved through the dark, and she sat with the wreckage of that understanding, and she did what she'd always done when the framework failed. She started building a new one, piece by piece. What she knew, what she could verify, what she could use. The estate appeared through the trees 40 minutes later, announced first by a set of iron gates that opened before the car reached them, then by a long gravel drive lined with security lighting that kept the path visible while leaving the surrounding grounds dark. The house itself was large in the specific way of old money. Not ostentatious, just permanent, built from stone that had been here longer than anyone currently alive and expected to be here after them. It sat above the Hudson River, and through the bare trees she could see the water reflecting back a low gray sky. She got out of the car before it had fully stopped. The gravel was cold and loud under her shoes. Adrian was behind her. The estate's interior was warm, high-ceilinged, lit by actual lamps rather than overhead fixtures. A man she didn't know met them inside and spoke to Adrian in rapid, low tones. Names she didn't recognize. Adrian listened and his face processed, and he gave 3 short directives and the man moved. Carver, Adrian said, turning to her. He left New York 6 hours ago. Private airfield in New Jersey. Destination unknown. He knew you'd figure it out eventually. He knew I'd figure it out tonight. He was already running when we were at the Renfield building. Adrian moved toward a room off the main hall. A study, she saw, as she followed. Walls of books and a desk with monitors and the specific air of a room where actual work happened. He wasn't just feeding them intelligence. He was coordinating. Coordinating what? Adrian sat at the desk and opened something on one of the monitors. He turned it toward her. A calendar. She looked at it and saw the date 6 weeks out circled in red, the consolidation vote, and around it a constellation of other dates and notations that she couldn't fully interpret but whose density communicated their significance. The gala, he said. He pointed to a date 4 days out. My annual fundraiser, here, at this estate. I have 140 people coming, politicians, business contacts, journalists. I host it every year. It is the single most covered event in my legitimate public calendar. He looked at her. Carver helped plan it. He knows the layout, the guest list, the security configuration, the catering team. He knows where every camera is and where the gaps are. She looked at the date. 4 days. They're going to use the gala, she said. It gives them a controlled environment. My security will be deployed protecting 140 guests. I'll be visible and committed to the event's function, and they'll have people inside, catering staff, event personnel, whoever Carver helped them place in the past 6 months, before my team can do a full sweep. Can you cancel it? Canceling signals that they've already won the first round. Every person on that guest list represents a relationship I've spent years building. Political connections that give me the ability to operate in legitimate spaces. If I cancel, I lose that leverage, and I lose it at exactly the moment I need it most. He leaned back. I can't cancel. Then you need to know who they've placed inside. Yes. You need to know the layout of the attack before it happens. Yes. And you need to do it without alerting Carver's network that you know about the compromise. She sat down in the chair across the desk. She was tired in a way that had moved past the physical and become something structural. Whoever Carver's been communicating with inside your organization, if you start pulling people, they'll know. They'll move the timeline. Yes, he looked at her. That's the problem. She looked at the monitor, the calendar, the gala date 4 days out. She thought about 140 people in a house she didn't know, with a security configuration she hadn't seen, against an unknown number of people who'd been planning this for months, with access to floor plans and staff rosters and camera positions. She thought about what she knew. She thought about what she'd spent 7 years learning that had nothing to do with restaurants and everything to do with understanding the internal logic of an event. How people moved through a space where the pressure points accumulated, which roles gave you access to which areas without raising questions. Show me the event plan, she said. He looked at her. The gala event plan. Catering flow, service stations, staff assignments, where the guests move through the evening. Show me. He pulled it up. She leaned forward and read. She read for 20 minutes without speaking. He didn't interrupt. He sat across the desk and watched her read and was quiet in the way of someone who has learned the value of not filling silence with noise. Then she pointed at the monitor. You're a service team for the gala. How many are regulars from previous years? Carver handled event staffing through an outside agency. The same agency every year? Yes. This year? A pause. He checked something. The booking was made 4 months ago, through Carver's office, same agency. Then assume the agency has been compromised. Assume every person on the service staff list who isn't a known quantity is a potential placement. She sat back. Which means you have 2 options. You either replace the entire service staff, which signals the compromise and collapses your timeline, or you find a way to monitor each placement throughout the event without their knowledge. Or, he said, I use someone who understands event service well enough to identify a placement by behavior, not by background check. She looked at him. You've run events in that capacity for 7 years, he said. You know what service staff looks like when they're actually working, and you know what it looks like when they're not. You want me at the gala. I want you where you're most effective. I'm most effective behind a desk with a laptop and a spreadsheet. That's not true, and you know it. He held her eyes. You read that event plan in 20 minutes and identified the staffing vulnerability that my entire security team missed. You got us out of the Renfield building. You mapped the threat geometry in the back of a car in the middle of an active situation. You are not someone who belongs behind a desk. She said nothing. I'm asking, he said. Not ordering. The distinction was deliberate and she noted it. I know you are, she said. Give me until morning. She slept for 4 hours in a room on the estate's second floor that smelled like old wood and cold air from somewhere she couldn't identify. 4 hours was what her body took, and then she was awake, sharp, the way she always woke. No gradual return, no confusion about where she was. She knew exactly where she was. She lay in the dark and thought about Carver. 9 years. The shape of a betrayal that long had a particular texture, not a sudden rupture, but a slow parallel life. Every meeting and every shared meal and every budget discussion running alongside the other thing, the hidden thing. And she wondered when it had started and what the original agreement had looked like, and whether Carver had walked in already compromised, or whether someone had turned him along the way. The mechanics of it. She needed to understand the mechanics. She got up at 5:40 and found the kitchen and made coffee with the equipment that was there, and stood at the window that looked over the Hudson and drank it while the sky turned from black to gray to the specific pale nothing of an early autumn morning with no sun visible. The river was dark and absolutely still. Adrian came in at 6:15. He'd slept less than she had, she could see it. He poured coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and didn't say anything for a moment. Then, my team did a full audit overnight. Carver had access to 14 months of security protocols, communications, personnel files, the estate's physical security layout, the gala plan. A pause. He also had access to the investigation files, the search, everything we used to locate you. He gave them my location the same day your investigator confirmed it. Yes. Which means they had 4 days to plan before you walked into Noir House. Yes. She set her coffee down. He also had access to your financial holdings, the 14 holding companies. Yes. Are any of them in a position where a sudden unexpected transaction could be read as voluntary cooperation with the consolidation? He looked up from his coffee. What are you thinking? I'm thinking that if Carver gave them your financial infrastructure access, they don't actually need your vote. They could manufacture the appearance of your cooperation, sign documentation in your name, move assets through the right channels, make it look like you've already agreed to the consolidation framework. She watched his face. Has your legal team checked the holding companies since last night? The pause that followed was not long, but it was complete. He picked up his phone. The conversation he had lasted 11 minutes. She listened to his side of it. Terse questions, the specific vocabulary of financial structures that she understood in outline, if not in detail. And she watched his face, and what she saw there was not panic, but something colder, more dangerous. The expression of a man who has been meticulous and careful and has found the gap in his own meticulous, careful system and is understanding what went through it. He ended the call. 2 of the holding companies, he said, documents dated 3 weeks ago. My signature. He stopped. It's not my signature, but it will pass initial scrutiny. They're already in your financial house. Yes. Then the vote is almost secondary. She stood up. They don't need to win a vote. They've already forged the first layer of your cooperation. The vote is theater. It establishes a public record that legitimizes transactions they've already set up to look like yours. He sat with that. The gala, she said. 4 days. They need you visible and publicly cooperative before anyone examines the forged documents closely enough to challenge them. The gala is where they make the picture complete. Or where they take you, he said quietly, and use that to make sure I don't publicly challenge the picture. She picked up her coffee. Then we need to make sure neither of those things happens. Lena, this isn't your fight. She looked at him over the rim of the cup. You bought my restaurant, she said. You put my staff under surveillance. You pulled me out of my own building in the middle of a dinner service. You made it my fight the moment you walked through that door. She set the cup down. I'm not saying that as an accusation. I'm saying it as a fact. So let's be practical about what I can contribute and stop asking me whether I want to be involved. He looked at her for a long moment. Then, something in the set of his face shifted. Not softened, exactly, but adjusted, like a weight redistributed. "All right," he said. The next 4 days were the most concentrated work of her life. She mapped the gala's event plan from memory and rebuilt it on paper, annotating every service station and staff movement corridor and guest flow pattern. She cross-referenced it against the estate's physical layout, using hand-drawn schematics that Adrian's security chief, a woman named Torres with close-cropped hair and the unreadable effect of someone who had done this work a very long time, reviewed and corrected and then reviewed again. She identified 11 positions in the service layout that gave a staff member unmonitored access to either the main hall or the east corridor that led to Adrian's private study. She slept in 4-hour blocks and ate whatever was in the kitchen and spoke to Marcus by phone twice, telling him only that there was a family situation, that she'd be back, that he was in charge, and that she was sorry for the short notice. Marcus said, "I figured," and "be careful," and didn't ask questions, which was why she'd hired him. On the third day, she sat across a table from Torres and went through the agency staff list, name by name, and Torres ran each one against available databases, and together they eliminated the verifiable ones and flagged the others. 11 flags out of 43 names. Too many to pull without signaling, not enough to feel safe leaving in place. "We don't pull them," Lena said. "We assign them." Torres looked at her. "We reassign the 11 flagged names to service positions that give them access to the locations we want them to go to," Lena said. "Positions that look normal from the outside. But those positions will also be under coverage that they won't see." She spread the floor plan on the table. "We let them believe the plan is working. We let them move. And when they move to their designated positions, we know exactly where every compromised person in the building is at the same moment." Torres studied the floor plan. "And Carver himself. Carver won't come himself. He'll have a coordinator on site, someone with a communication line out." She pointed to the floor plan. "Here, the catering prep area. It's the one position with a radio frequency the estate's jamming protocol doesn't cover. Whoever their coordinator is, that's where they'll go when they need to call out." Torres was quiet for a moment. "How do you know about the jamming protocol?" "I read the security brief. Adrian gave me access." "The gap in coverage is not in the security brief." "No," Lena said. "It isn't. I noticed it when we walked the estate perimeter on day 2. The signal drops there. I tested it with my phone." Torres looked at her with an expression that wasn't quite approval, but was its nearest neighbor. The gala opened at 7 in the evening under a sky that had turned cold and clean, the first real cold of the autumn, and the estate's exterior lighting made the grounds look like something from a life that was entirely different from the one Lena had been living for the past 4 days. Cars arrived. The 140 guests, politicians, lawyers, journalists, the carefully assembled social infrastructure of a man who moved in both worlds, filed through the main entrance and into a space that Lena had reordered without any of them knowing it. She was in the kitchen, not as a guest, dressed for service, dark clothes, an earpiece that Torres had configured, her hair up and her face neutral, and her hands steady. Exactly where she needed to be to see everything without being seen by anyone who wasn't looking for her specifically. Torres was in the security room. Adrian was on the floor, working the room with the practiced ease of a man who had done this 100 times, who could hold a conversation about emerging market investment strategies while monitoring the position of every person in a building through a security feed, which was exactly what he was doing. The first hour was quiet. Champagne, small plates, the murmur of 140 people performing their social functions. At 8:15, Lena saw the first flag move. A server she designated, one of the 11, a man whose name in the staffing file was Gabriel Rice, who Torres's database had flagged as a registered alias, moved from his assigned station at the East Bar to the corridor that led past the private study. Not urgently, not conspicuously, with the practiced invisibility of a good service professional, which he was not but had been trained to appear to be. She spoke into the earpiece. Low. "Flag 1 is moving east corridor." Torres's voice came back. "We have him." "He's not going to the study. He's going to the stairwell behind it, the secondary stairwell." "Why?" "Because the secondary stairwell has a window at the first landing. overlooking the main hall, a position. She was already moving through the kitchen toward the rear service passage. He's going to get eyes on the floor from above. He's a spotter. A beat. That's not in the plan. It's not in our plan. It's in theirs. She was moving fast now, the service corridor narrow and lit by fluorescent strips, her shoes quiet on the rubber-matted floor. Torres. Who has the secondary stairwell? No one. We didn't assign it. Put someone there now. She heard Torres give the order. She kept moving. She came through the service door at the base of the secondary stairwell, and she was looking up the stairs, and she could see the man, Gabriel Rice, or whoever he actually was, on the landing above her with his phone out and his back to her. And she could see him typing, not talking, typing, and she understood that the frequency gap she'd identified and that Torres's jamming wasn't covering was exactly where he was standing. She went up the stairs. He heard her on the fourth step. He turned. She said, "You're in the wrong part of the building." He looked at her. He made a calculation she could see him making. She was one woman. He was a trained operative. The math should have been simple. But she'd thought about this moment for 4 days, and she had 4 days of sleep deprivation and cold coffee and the specific rage of someone whose life had been picked up and shaken until it came apart. And when he reached for the phone to complete whatever transmission he'd been in the middle of, she was already moving, her hand closing on his wrist before he could complete the motion, and she drove his arm back against the stairwell wall with the full weight of 4 days of accumulated fury behind it. The phone skittered off the landing railing and fell. She heard it hit the floor below. She didn't look. He was stronger than her. That was a fact, and she'd accounted for it. She didn't try to hold him. She let go the moment she felt him pull against her grip, and she stepped back and he overcorrected, stumbling into the wall. And in the second that cost him, Torres's man came through the stairwell door below with 2 others behind him, and the man who called himself Gabriel Rice understood the geometry of his situation in the way that people understand things when the options have been reduced to 0. He stopped moving. Torres's voice in her ear. "We have him. Lena. The coordinator in the prep area just moved. We need you back in the kitchen." She was already going down the stairs. The prep area was at the far end of the kitchen corridor, a long, narrow room that smelled of sheet pans and institutional cleaning product, and when she pushed through the door, the coordinator was there, a woman she'd never seen before, mid-40s, dressed in the black and white of catering service, standing with a radio in her hand and the expression of someone who has just realized that the silence coming through the radio means the spotter is gone. She looked at Lena. Lena said, "Put it down." The woman's hand tightened on the radio. Her eyes went to the door behind Lena, calculating, and Lena shifted her weight to the left, and the woman recalculated, and the radio went down on the prep table with a sound like a closing argument. "Who's coordinating from outside?" Lena said. The woman said nothing. "You already know the spotter is off the board," Lena said. "You know because the radio went quiet and nothing you've transmitted in the last 4 minutes has been acknowledged. Your outside coordinator is expecting a signal that hasn't come, and they're making decisions right now based on incomplete information. If you want any possibility of a negotiated outcome for yourself, the window for that is about 90 seconds wide." She held the woman's eyes. "Who is coordinating from outside?" A pause that lasted the weight of a real decision. "Marrero's man," the woman said. "Vega. He's in a vehicle on the North Access Road." Lena spoke into the earpiece. Torres had heard it. The response was immediate. Then the lights in the prep room flickered. Lena turned. Through the prep room's single high window, she saw in the distance beyond the estate grounds a vehicle's headlights swing in a wide arc. Not leaving, she realized. Coming in. Coming through the north gate, which should have been closed, which Torres's team should have been holding. Her earpiece crackled. Torres, and her voice had changed, stripped of its professional remove, running on something faster and more urgent. "North gate is breached. 3 vehicles, armed." And then the estate's exterior darkness exploded into white. Not light, not gunfire. The concussive bloom of something detonated at the gate's control housing, and the shockwave came through the prep room window as a pressure change Lena felt in her chest and eardrums, and the single high window cracked but didn't break, and she heard the estate above her. The gala floor, the 140 people in their formal clothes holding champagne, Erupt in the specific sound of a crowd that has just understood that something real is happening. She was moving before Torres finished the transmission, back through the kitchen corridor, through the service door into the main hall, and the scene she entered was controlled chaos. Not panic yet, but the edge of it, guest pressed toward the far wall, Adrian's security team already moving in formation through the crowd. Adrian himself visible near the center of the room, on his feet, his phone in his hand, scanning. He saw her the moment she came through the door. She saw him see her, and the thing that moved across his face was brief but complete, and then he was across the room in 12 steps. "North Gate," she said. "I know. Torres has 2 teams repositioning." He took her arms, not gripping, guiding, and she let it. "There's a safe room in the lower level. I need you." "I'm not going to a safe room. Lena, Torres needs every person she has on the perimeter. If I'm in a safe room with a guard, that's one less person outside." She looked at him. "I know where the coordinator is. I know where your 11 flags are positioned. I can direct your floor team to each of them faster than anyone else in this building." She held his eyes. "You know I can." Outside, through the estate's high windows, she could see lights moving. Vehicle lights on the grounds themselves now, past the gate. She could hear, beneath the crowd noise, the specific sound of disciplined movement outside the building's east side. Adrian made the decision in under 3 seconds. "Stay next to me," he said. "Every step." "Every step," she agreed. What followed was 47 minutes that she would spend years reassembling in the right order. Torres and her team held the east wing. 2 of the vehicles stopped at the estate's south face, and the personnel they discharged moved on the service entrance, the same entrance Lena had come through. And Torres's people met them at the door, and the fight that happened there was close and brutal, and 4 of Torres's team took injuries that ranged from serious to catastrophic, and none of them left their positions. Inside, the gala floor became something unrecognizable from the event it had been 20 minutes earlier. Adrian's security had moved the guests to the interior rooms, dining room, library, the large interior hall that had no exterior walls. And the perimeter staff were working the building's skin, the windows and doors, and the points where the outside was trying to become inside. Lena worked the floor. She moved through the building's interior with her earpiece in and Torres's real-time positioning in one ear and her own read of the space in both eyes, and she found Flag 3 in the East Bathroom corridor, and Flag 7 near the library service access, and Flag 9 standing in a position near the electrical panel that made immediate and terrible sense, and she directed Torres's interior team to each one and watched them neutralize each position with the specific efficiency of people who are very good at a necessary thing. Flag 9 was the critical one, the electrical panel. She understood what it meant when she saw him there, a man in catering black with his hand on the panel housing. And she understood it 3 seconds before Torres's team reached him, 3 seconds in which she was close enough to him that she could have touched him, and what she understood was that the panel controlled the estate's internal communication relay, and if he killed it, Torres lost coordination between her teams at the exact moment the outside push was intensifying. She hit the panel housing herself, both hands, flat, from the side, driving it closed against his fingers before he could complete the circuit he was working on, and the pain in her palms was immediate and considerable, and she held it closed anyway, held it by leaning her whole body against it until Torres's person arrived and the man was removed from the equation and the panel was intact. Her hands were shaking when she stepped back. Not from fear, from the adrenaline finding nowhere left to go. She stood in the corridor and breathed, and her palms burned, and the earpiece gave her Torres's voice saying the exterior push was stalling. The third vehicle had not moved from the North Road. The Marrero coordinator, Vega, the name the woman in the prep room had given her, had apparently aborted. Aborted. The word landed in the corridor with the strange lightness of something that hadn't been earned yet, that she didn't trust. She found Adrian in the main hall 12 minutes later. He was standing with Torres and 2 other people she didn't know, and his jacket was gone. She didn't know when that had happened. And there was a cut along his left jaw that was bleeding with the deliberate persistence of face wounds. He was pressing a cloth against it and talking and stopped talking when he saw her. His eyes went immediately to her hands. She'd noticed the bruising beginning to develop across both palms, and she was holding them slightly away from her sides in the unconscious way of someone managing pain they haven't acknowledged yet. He said nothing about it. He crossed to her and looked at her hands without touching them, and then looked at her face. Torres says you held the panel, he said. Someone had to. He looked at her for a moment, then he turned back to Torres. Status on Vega. Vehicle is still on the North Road, not moving, not leaving. Torres's voice was measured. We think he's waiting. For what? For Carver, Lena said. They both looked at her. Carver planned this, she said. Every piece. He's not going to stay off site for the outcome. He needs to be here for the final negotiation, the moment where he presents you with the situation as it stands and makes the ask for your formal cooperation. He needs your face, your signature, your visible agreement. She looked at Adrian. He's coming. Vega is holding position because Carver told him to hold until he arrives. The silence lasted 4 seconds. Can we verify his location? Adrian said, to Torres. We've been trying to track his aircraft since New Jersey. Last confirmed ping was 3 hours ago over, Torres checked her phone, Eastern Pennsylvania. 2 hours out, Lena said. Maybe less. Adrian nodded once. He made 2 calls in rapid succession, speaking in terse half-sentences that she could parse and outline. Legal contacts, she thought, and something else. Something she didn't have the vocabulary for. He ended the second call and stood for a moment with the phone in his hand. There are 2 federal agents on the guest list tonight, he said. He looked at Lena as he said it, like he was deciding something about her while he said it. Personal relationships, not official. They're here as guests. Carver knows they're here, she said. He had the guest list. Yes, but he doesn't know what I'm about to tell them. He went to find his federal agents. Lena sat down on a bench in the main hall and held her bruised palms open against her thighs and let the building settle around her. The sounds of the estate recalibrating, Torres's team cycling through post-contact protocol, the muffled noise of 140 guests being managed through their collective shock in the interior rooms, the distant sound of the North Gate being resecured. The sounds of a crisis finding its shape on the other side of its worst moment. She thought about Carver. 9 years at Adrian's side, which meant 9 years of watching the machinery of a life that operated in 2 registers simultaneously. The legitimate public face and the other thing underneath it. Long enough to understand exactly which levers moved which parts. Long enough to build a parallel map of the whole structure and sell it to the people who wanted to own it. She thought about the spotter's phone falling through the stairwell, the small sound of it hitting the floor. She thought about her own hands on the electrical panel, leaning her whole weight against it, and the specific quality of that decision. Not heroic, not calculated, just the response of someone who had identified the problem and had the position and the body to solve it with. She'd done it the same way she'd handled 100 operational crises in 7 years of running a restaurant. The problem, the resource, the action. The fact that this particular problem had involved a man and a live electrical panel instead of a broken refrigeration unit and a supplier on the phone did not, in the immediate moment of the problem, feel substantially different. That realization sat with her on the bench in the main hall. She was still sitting there when Adrian came back. He sat next to her, not close, 1 seat of space between them. They're making calls, he said. If Carver arrives and we can put him in a room with 2 federal agents and evidence of forged financial documents and a coordinated armed assault on a private estate, he stopped. It won't be clean. Federal investigations are never clean, but it dismantles the consolidation framework. Without Carver's financial architecture, the 3 families don't have the infrastructure to make the merger work even if the vote passes. And the vote. Vasquez's abstention was coerced. I have documentation. If the coercion can be demonstrated, he paused. It won't happen tonight. These things take months, sometimes years. The legal machinery is slow and unglamorous and expensive. He looked at her. But it will happen. She nodded. The forged signatures on the holding company documents, she said. How bad? Recoverable. My legal team was already on it before tonight. The forensic financial work will take weeks, but the trail is there. A pause. Carver was meticulous. Meticulous people leave meticulously documented trails. She almost smiled. Almost. Will he actually come? She said. He'll come. He spent 9 years building this. He's not going to watch the execution from Pennsylvania. He was right. Carver arrived at 12:40 in the morning by helicopter, landing on the north pad that the estate maintained for exactly this kind of arrival and that Carver had therefore always known about. He came with two people. He walked through the north gate that Torres's team had resecured and then deliberately, specifically reopened, and he walked through the estate's exterior and through the main entrance and into the hall where Adrian was waiting, and where the two federal agents were also waiting, and where Torres's team had the exit geometry completely covered. Lena watched it from the hallway. She wasn't in the room. She'd been asked to stay out of the room, which she'd agreed to because she understood that her presence would complicate the legal architecture of what was happening. What she could see through the hall's open doorway was enough. Carver was a lean man in his 50s with silver hair and the kind of face that had learned to be reassuring and had gotten very good at it. He walked into the room with the composure of someone who had a plan, and then he didn't have a plan, and the composure didn't crack. She'd give him that. But it changed quality, became something performed rather than felt, and she watched him look at the two agents and look at Adrian and make the calculation that she'd made herself at various points over the past 4 days. The calculation about whether the exit options were actually zero or just appeared to be. They were zero. She watched Carver understand that. The conversation that followed lasted a long time. She didn't hear most of it. She sat in the hall with her back against the wall and her bruised palms resting on her knees, and she listened to the register of voices without the words, and she thought about nothing specific, which was new, which was the first time in 4 days her mind hadn't been running at operational speed, and the quiet of it was exhausting in the specific way of something that has been held at tension for a long time finally releasing. Torres found her there an hour later. "It's done," Torres said. She sat down against the wall next to Lena with the manner of someone who does not normally sit on floors but has decided the floor is appropriate. "Carver is in federal custody. His two people are in our custody pending transfer. The agents are making additional calls." A pause. "Marrero's network is already fracturing. They're getting communications from inside. Conti is going quiet, which in my experience means they're cutting their losses and withdrawing." She looked at Lena's hands. "Those need to be looked at." "I know. I have a first aid kit." "I know. You going to let me get it?" "Yes," Lena said. "In a minute." Torres sat with her for the minute. It was a companionable silence, which surprised Lena, and she thought that under different circumstances she'd like Torres, which was an odd thought to have on the floor of an estate at 2 a.m. after a night like this one, and she had it anyway. Adrian found her 20 minutes later, her hands wrapped, and the worst of the bruising supported, sitting in the kitchen with a cup of tea she hadn't asked for, and that Torres had made appear regardless. He sat across the table from her. His jaw had been cleaned and closed with 2 small strips of tape, and the blood was gone, and he looked tired in a way that went past the physical, the tired of someone who has been waiting for a thing to end for a very long time. "It's over," he said. She looked at him. "Is it?" "The immediate threat, yes." A pause. "The legal process? No, that's years. I'll spend years in rooms with attorneys and investigators and the documentation of everything Carver built, dismantling it piece by piece. I will likely lose some of the legitimate business relationships. The political connections will need to be rebuilt from a more disclosed position." He was looking at the table. "I'll cooperate with the federal investigation. That was the agreement. Full cooperation. Full cooperation. Which means testifying about things I've done that I would prefer not to testify about." He looked up. "I'm telling you because you deserve the complete picture. Not the version that makes me easier to accept." She held his eyes. "How complete?" "There are things I've ordered in my capacity as the person who ran the DeLuca interests after my father died that I cannot make morally defensible. I can explain the context. I can explain the choices. I cannot make them defensible." He said it without flinching. "The federal agreement covers my cooperation in exchange for certain considerations, but it doesn't erase what the cooperation is about." The kitchen was very quiet. The Hudson outside, invisible in the dark. "Thank you for telling me that," she said. "I need you to know who I am. Not who I was trying to be when I found you. Who I actually am." She thought about that. She thought about 7 years of her carefully ordinary life, The restaurant and the paperwork and the maintenance requests and the staff she'd fought for and the smile she'd worn that gave nothing away. She thought about the panel in the stairwell corridor in her own hands and the decision she'd made in half a second with no deliberation, the decision that had turned out to be exactly her. "I know who you are," she said. "I've had 4 days of a fairly concentrated introduction." Something shifted in his face. The exhaustion rearranged itself into something less defended. "The restaurant," she said. "Noir House. Whatever happens with the legal process, is it going to be in a position where it needs to be sold?" He considered that. Possibly, depending on how the asset review goes. Some of the legitimate holdings will need to be divested to demonstrate clean separation from the consolidated interests. He paused. "I don't want to sell it. No. But I may not have the option." She looked down at her wrapped hands. "If it comes to that," she said, "I want first right of refusal on the purchase." He looked at her. "I've run it for 7 years," she said. "I know where every problem is and how it behaves under pressure. I know the staff and the suppliers and which reviewer to call when the sommelier situation gets complicated. I know the exhaust vent on the 3rd floor has a persistent seal issue that no contractor has correctly diagnosed because they keep treating it as a mechanical problem when it's actually a structural one." She looked up at him. "I can run that restaurant. I've been running it. I'd like to own it." He was quiet for a long moment. "That's what you want," he said. "That's part of what I want." The space between those two sentences did the work that neither of them reached for words to do. She watched him understand what the second sentence meant, and she watched him sit with it with a care that she recognized as the care of someone who has learned the cost of moving too fast and is not going to make that mistake again. "Okay," he said. "Just that. Okay." She nodded. She looked at her tea. The kitchen was still and the night outside was moving toward a gray edge that would eventually become morning, and she was tired in every part of her body and her hands hurt. And she realized, with the specific surprise of someone encountering a thing they'd stopped expecting, all right, not fixed, not resolved in any clean final sense. The legal process would be what he'd said it would be. Years, rooms, testimony, the slow grinding work of accountability. Her restaurant might have to be sold and bought and legally restructured before it could be hers. The staff she'd left without adequate explanation would need to be returned to and apologized to and reestablished with. The 7 years of careful, ordinary life had been permanently rearranged, and she didn't know yet what the new shape of it was. But she was all right. Torres appeared in the kitchen doorway to give Adrian a status update, and Lena looked at the kitchen's ordinary surfaces. The stainless steel, the industrial equipment, the anatomy of a working room. And she thought about her own kitchen, 45 minutes south, and the way it smelled before service, the specific warmth of it, the percussion of people who knew what they were doing it well. She thought about Marcus saying, "I figured," and "be careful," and not asking questions. She thought about Jamie Reyes, whose debt had been cleared by a man who bought a restaurant because someone whispered that she was in it, and who had no idea why his check had looked different that month and had not asked, and who showed up every day and did his work with the care of someone who understood that showing up every day was itself a kind of integrity. She thought about the maintenance request for the 3rd floor exhaust vent. 4 denials. The 5th one, she'd decided, was going to be written differently. She'd been composing it in her head for weeks before everything had changed. She'd write it differently. She had the time now. When Torres was gone, Adrian sat back down. He didn't speak immediately. He poured himself a cup of tea from the pot Torres had left, and he held it. And he looked at his hands around it, and she looked at the same hands, and the 10 years between them were not gone. They were not the kind of thing that became gone, but they were no longer an absence. They had become the specific history that had produced this particular kitchen at this particular hour, these particular people with their particular damage, sitting across a table from each other in the dark before the morning. "When do you want to go back?" he said. "To the restaurant?" "Yes." She thought about it, actually thought about it, with the same practical attention she gave to everything she managed. "Tomorrow," she said. "Afternoon service. I want to be there for afternoon service." He looked at her. Something in his face that was not sentimentality but was related to it. The expression of someone seeing a thing they'd spent a long time looking for, seeing it clearly, not reaching for it, just seeing it. "Okay," he said. She finished her tea. Outside, the Hudson made no sound. The grounds were quiet in the way that grounds become quiet after something significant has happened in them, a quality of aftermath that is different from ordinary night quiet. She could see through the kitchen window the first almost imperceptible shift in the sky above the tree line. Not light, not yet. The idea of light arriving slowly. Her hands hurt. She was going back to her restaurant tomorrow. That was enough. That was exactly enough. She held that fact the way you hold something you found after a long search. Not tightly, because the tight holding is for things you're afraid to lose, and she was done with that now, done with the architecture of fear that she'd built her careful, ordinary life around about. But steadily, with both hands, damaged and wrapped and present. The kitchen held them both in its quiet, and the night outside moved in its own direction, and eventually, without either of them having planned it, they were talking. Not about the vote or Carver or the legal machinery that was already in motion in various offices in the city to the south. Not about the 10 years or the cost of them, or what the accounting of those costs might look like once there was time to sit with it properly. About the restaurant. About the sommelier and the reserve bottles and Marcus, who never asked unnecessary questions, and Jamie Reyes, who showed up every day. About the way the private dining room caught the light in the late afternoon when the angle was right and the tables were set and the whole space looked like something from a different kind of story, a quieter one. She talked and he listened and he talked and she listened and the sky outside continued its slow business of changing, and by the time it had shifted from gray to the pale specific color of an early morning in October, they had been talking for an hour and a half, and neither of them had noted the time passing because the time had become, without announcement, something different from what it had been. It had become theirs. The morning came the way mornings do, not all at once, not dramatically, but in increments too small to catch individually, so that you look up at some point and realize it's happened. Light on the river, the outline of trees, the kitchen in ordinary daylight, which made it look smaller and more real and like exactly what it was. Adrian drove her back to the city himself. No security team, just the car, and the two of them and the Palisades Highway running south along the river, and the city assembling itself from the distance as they went. The Manhattan skyline coming up over the horizon piece by piece until it was the whole thing, the whole familiar, impossible fact of it. She had him drop her at Noir House. She stood on the sidewalk outside with her wrapped hands at her sides and looked at the facade for a moment. The sign, unlit in the morning, the window boxes, the brass handle on the door that she'd touched 10,000 times without thinking about it. She went in. Marcus was already there. He was in the office with a spreadsheet on the screen and a coffee going cold beside the keyboard. And when she opened the door, he looked up and looked at her hands and looked at her face and then looked back at his spreadsheet. "Afternoon service," he said. "Afternoon service," she agreed. "There's a 6 top at 4 that asked for you specifically. I'll be here at 3. He nodded. He looked back at his screen. She looked at the side of his face, the face of someone who showed up every day and did his work and asked the right questions and left the other ones alone. And she thought that she had been very lucky in this particular person, and that she had not told him so often enough. "Marcus," she said. He looked up. "Thank you," she said, "for the last week." He held her eyes for a moment. "You all right?" "Yes." He nodded once. He looked back at his screen. 3 o'clock, he said. She went to her office. She sat at her desk. She opened her laptop. On the screen, still open from the night she'd been pulled out of this room in a rush, was the acquisition document she'd been reading when the alley door had rattled. She looked at it for a moment. Then she closed it. She opened the maintenance request form. 3rd floor exhaust vent. She began to write the 5th request, the one she'd been composing in her head. And this time she wrote it as what it actually was, a structural problem, not a mechanical one. And she wrote it with the specific technical clarity of someone who had spent 7 years learning the bones of this building and knew exactly where it ached and why and what it needed to stop. She sent it. The restaurant was quiet around her. In an hour, the kitchen crew would come in and the sound of the place would start. The particular living sound of it, The thing she'd built her days around for 7 years. The thing she was going to own when the legal machinery had done what it needed to do. The thing that had been hers in practice for long enough that the paperwork was almost a formality. Almost. She sat in her office and drank the coffee she'd made and looked at the water stain on the office wall. Not the ceiling, a different stain, lower, from a winter pipe issue 2 seasons ago. And she thought about nothing important for the first time in a week. She let her mind be quiet. She let the sounds of the city come in through the exterior wall and exist without meaning anything. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Her body tensed before she could stop it. The week's accumulated reflex, and then she looked at the screen. 3rd floor exhaust vent. Structural issue, not mechanical. I'll send someone who knows the difference. A D. She looked at the message. She put the phone face down on the desk. Then she picked it back up and typed, "The someone should be licensed and insured. I'll need documentation for the property file." His reply came in under a minute, of course. She set the phone down. She finished her coffee. Outside on Park Avenue, Manhattan continued doing what it did, loud and indifferent and inexhaustible, racing beneath its own weight, full of people building and losing and rebuilding the structures of their lives without stopping to acknowledge how remarkable it was that they kept doing it. Inside, in the small, honest space of her office, Lena Whitmore opened the afternoon reservation list and began to work.